So I'm sorry, I just gave you tunnel vision here. It's great to see you. Thanks again. So I am going to talk about marine mammals in Northern California, and there's a lot to say. So I'm going to try to summarize some of it today for you. I want to help start out by characterizing the North Coast habitats in terms of what we think about their offshore and nearshore and onshore habitats. Really help you think about, why do marine mammals come to the North Coast? Like, what is special about it here? What's the challenge and what's a benefit for marine mammals to come here? I'm going to summarize quickly the gray whale and elephant seal research and the marine mammal stranding research. And then at the end, I have some time to really invite you to become stewards of the marine mammals of the North Coast with Allison and I and the rest of our program, and invite you to join us in trying to unravel some of these puzzles that we've been coming up against. I want to just say from the outset that all of this work is done under NOAA permits, and all of the photos that were taken under research permits as we continue on. Okay. So I want to say initially that this work has been done with the Marine Mammal Education and Research Program, which was established in 1997, and that has had over 300 undergraduate students that have been involved in this work, and over a dozen graduate students. So the work that I'm talking about with you today has not been just done by me. It's been done by a wonderful community of amazing students and colleagues throughout the country. And I wanted to thank them and acknowledge them before we begin. So what is it like to be a marine mammal in Northern California? That's a big question. And I think that part of, as I was thinking about this talk, I wanted to sort of take a minute to think about what it's like to be a marine mammal from their eyes moving out. And so I want to think about the bathymetry of the coast, and what it's like underwater, what makes this place unique. And this is our coastline here, and this is a Google Earth map. And you can see up here, there's a wide continental shelf up here, but around where we live, around the Francis Coast area, there's some beautiful deep sea channels that are coming in, right? So you have an extensive continental shelf, and you have deep sea canyons coming close to shore that are related to the triple plate junction. You also have extensive rocky intertidal areas, vast sandy beaches, small pocket beaches, and then cliffs with no beaches. So the coastline is not only remote and hard to access, but it's also really diverse in what it offers a marine mammal. Nearshore habitats are also diverse. Everything from hard bottom, which are these first four colors, to the soft bottom, which come after that. So there's a diversity of habitat types, which means there's a diversity of prey and a rich resource to have offshore. And then finally, there are amazing nearshore currents, and it's basically the California current, but you also have some other currents that get a little jumbled around Cape Mendocino. And that jumbling can be both a benefit and a curse to marine mammals, but it results in increased productivity around this area. And that, coupled with the unique bathymetry of the area, can really yield some interesting and diverse marine mammal populations. So why are marine mammals here? And I've tried to put this in a couple different categories. One is safe passage. They just might be migrating through. So a number of marine mammals are just passing through and not really focused on our resources except as a place to keep safe. It also is a safe harbor where they can rely on local resources, and they can be seasonal resources where they come to feed during one part of the year, or they come to mate during another part of the year, or we have some animals that stay here year round. So mammals visit the North Coast, marine mammals use the North Coast as both a throughway as well as a place to come to rest. So safe passage for migrating animals. The resources in Northern California for this include having a really diverse coastal and nearshore habitats. And again, there's coves and kelp forests for protection. Gray whales and gray whale calves and mums particularly nugget along these inshore habitats on the way up, and that is a way to avoid killer whales or other predators. So there's really interesting coastal and nearshore habitats. Open water and deep water are also refuges away from predators. And also there's just less human disturbance in Northern California. So animals that are migrating through have less interactions with humans. less, it's relatively quiet, and there's less of a risk for entanglement or interaction than you would see, for example, in Southern California. So there are very few challenges up here for migrating animals, some interactions with fisheries, some potentially increased shipping traffic that we might be seeing in Northern California. But this is actually a fairly good stretch of coast for migrating marine mammals to navigate. So for safe harbor, we have some locally resident marine mammals. Harbor seals and harbor porpoise are the first that come to mind. It's a safe place to live year round. Or there are animals that migrate here, and those animals that come back to this place find a place on shore to rest or molt or breed. And so it's a safe harbor for either different parts of the year or for their whole lives. And again, that's dependent upon these rich habitats and rich productivity based on the currents, the bathymetry as we go along. So there's challenges in this safe harbor. If you're dependent on one place and that place, that habitat is changing, then it causes a problem for resident animals. And some of the ways that habitat can shift, if you were here for Dr. Bordeaux's talk, it includes ocean acidification, which is affecting the different prey levels based on climate change, increasing ocean temperatures, right? So as the water gets warmer, it affects not only the prey, but actually the organism itself. You have prey range shifts. So some prey are no longer able to accommodate, excuse me, warmer water down south and are starting to move up the coast, and they may move out of the range of their predators. Sea level rise can impact animals that are depending on coastal systems and coastlines for their use of habitat. And outbreaks of disease-causing agents like domoic acid or other things like leptospirosis can really be detrimental to a particular habitat where animals are tied. So there are also threats to critical habitat, to these places that are sort of important for animals, which includes construction, pollution, etc. So what about feeding? What about these animals that come here to feed? Like I said, this is an amazingly productive area. Seasonally abundant food, strong upwelling along the coast, which brings cold, nutrient-rich water to the surface. It enables us marine mammals to really find a valuable resource and to be safe in this area. There's year-round fish and invertebrate communities, and there's a variety of relatively undisturbed habitats along our coast, unlike in other parts of the North Coast or the California coast. Challenges, though, are again, this increasingly dynamic changes in ocean temperatures and productivity can really affect how animals can make a living here, including ocean acidification and decreasing prey populations. So that's just a little bit of background that I wanted to talk to you about. But I wanted to sort of use that lens to look through as we think about a couple different types of marine mammals today. And I wanted to focus a little bit on gray whales, who both migrate through and use this as a seasonally resident place, as a safe harbor. I'm going to talk about elephant seals, who really do depend on the terrestrial part of the habitat here, but spend the rest of their time way offshore in different places where they feed. And then I want to talk to you about stranded marine mammals, as this is their final resting place. But by understanding who they are and what kind of lives they live offshore, we can start to assemble a picture of what the marine mammal community looks like along our coastline that we wouldn't have the opportunity to do elsewise. So, how's that sound, you guys? Thumbs up? Anybody know how to do this? Good. Thanks. There we go. There's a couple. I don't know if you know how to do the little confetti things, but I like those too. Thanks, Hank. There you go, Greta. Appreciate that. Oh, there's some confetti. Thanks, Allison. Good to see you. Thanks, Nick. All right. Nice to see you guys. We're all still there. So let's talk about gray whales. Thanks. Okay. Oh, Greta, hearts. That makes me happy. So gray whales, they depend upon our coast for both safe passage and safe harbor. So let's thinking about how the majority of gray whales work. So majority of gray whales feed in the Bering and Chukchi Seas up in Alaska. That's where the majority of gray whales go. They then migrate down to Baja along our coastline, and that's where they give birth and they mate and they go back and forth. So for a long time, it was thought that that's what gray whales did. They just passed by, and you may be seeing a bunch of gray whales now off the coast down south in southern Humboldt. But what we've come to realize in the mid to late 90s was that there's another group of gray whales that forego this whole migration and stay during the summer months between Trinidad and Southeast Alaska. And these are called the Pacific Coast Feeding Group, or the PCFG whales. And we've been working together with a ton of collaborators from Alaska down to Southern California to try to understand a little bit more about these animals, and in particular, what is unique about them and what is unique about this habitat that is both plentiful enough for them to forego this whole migration, and how stable is that population over time. And if we think back about the climate challenges that are facing marine mammals right now, how stable is that going to be as the ocean conditions change? So we've been looking at this for quite some time now, looking at the spatial and temporal distribution of gray whales. We've been doing it largely in northern Humboldt County because it's thought that this is the southern edge of their feeding range, Trinidad Head area. And so we've been looking at this over the years, and I have a new graduate student, Robin, who is just starting up this work again. And so we did that from shore, we did that from helicopters, we did that from boats, but really just trying to see, how do they spend their time here? How do they rely on our coast? We do this in part by using photo identification. So with our permit, we take these photos, and as you can see, this animal gecko that we used to call gecko and Orion are very different. Just by looking at the pigmentation patterns on their backs, you can look to identify these individuals. And then this goes into a collaborative data set where we're able to track these animals year after year. It's been 20 years now, over 20 years since we started this project. And so we get to understand their life history and their habitat needs, and we're able to identify some critical habitat. But what did come out of this work was that there are over 300 unique whales that were identified in Northern California and Southern Oregon as part of this PCFG group. And we are sort of working, like I said, with collaborators to really understand how that group of individuals makes a living and what's unique about this area. So our collaborative research is now including documenting the foraging ecology of gray whales. We did this 15 years ago with a previous grad student, and we're looking again this year to sort of look again to see how that relationship has changed between predator and prey. And then continuing to look at the abundance and distribution of gray whales, again, in relation to these changing dynamic ocean conditions. So what I would love to hear from you, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end, is to hear about sightings of gray whales. And I've heard anecdotally, oh, we see gray whales here all the time or not. Again, it's thought that the southern feeding range is around Trinidad, but it might not be. It might be Cape Mendocino, it might be Shelter Cove. So we would love to sort of work with community members and get an idea if you have sightings outside of that typical migration time. So that's something we can chat about a little bit, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So threats to gray whales, as I've mentioned, include increased ocean temperature, warm water blobs. So these large quantities of ocean just become super hot, and because of changing current conditions and other factors. And those warm water blobs can cause like a dead zone in the middle of that. And it can infect productivity throughout the ocean, right? Throughout the contiguous ocean. And so we want to think about how that impacts gray whales. We also, as you know, based on climate change, are losing Arctic ice, and that is affecting the prey base that the whales that did the entire migration would focus on. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that shifts what might be happening in this local PCFG group. And there's increased disturbance from vessels during migration. There's increased entanglements, there's increased ship strikes. And so we want to sort of be able to track that to see if there's something we can do to mitigate the harm to the whales while supporting the livelihoods of the people that are using the water at the same time. So let me talk to you about northern elephant seals. And again, this is work that many of you probably met Emma Levy, who's worked out on the elephant seal colony now with Jesse and BLM for a few years. And I'm going to talk to you about our work out there. And so these are seasonal residents. And again, I want you to understand that they spend part of their time on the shore and they spend part of their time at sea. So elephant seals come ashore for 3 reasons: to breed, to molt, or to rest. And they feed a great distance from their haul out sites. And so what this map is showing is all the places that elephant seals have come. And there's a beautiful story here about where they started. Elephant seals started from this current population started from a very small population that was hunted to near extinction. And by near extinction, I mean less than 20 animals. And since then, it's repopulated all the way up to the King Range Conservation Area. And again, this is the most northern productive colony along the coast. And so what we're doing is trying to study this colony not only for local management decisions, like how do we keep humans and animals safe? What are our predictions as sea level rise changes, those sorts of things. But it's also potentially important for the entire survival of the population. That might be straining it a little bit too strongly, but it could be this seed colony that will be a jumping spot for colonizations farther north of here. So anyway, these are all of the different places that elephant seals have made a home. And like I mentioned before, they feed a great distance from shore. And so if you look at this chart, this is from Dan Costa's lab down in Santa Cruz at UC Santa Cruz. And they put telemetry satellite tags on seals and were able to track them when they leave the coast. And what they were able to see is that here in the black, the males typically hug along the shore and spend their time feeding in these local areas on sort of deep sea fish. And you see here, the females are heading way the heck offshore. Some are just going to Hawaii, which I don't blame them. They're going way offshore and they're feeding in different areas, right? And so when you think about elephant seals on the coast, sometimes you might think it would just make sense for them to just nugget offshore and eat little things, but they don't. They're here and then they go far away and then they come back here. So really they're marine mammals, but they're not using the local marine environment at all. They're just using the habitat to breed and to molt and to rest. So the collaborative work we're doing with BLM and the King Range National Conservation Area is to document the timing of elephant seal habitat use at the Punta Gorda colony, to track the growth of the colony, to determine how it's growing, what that mechanism of growth is, and to document the habitat use as it relates to the recreational use of the Lost Coast Trail. So if I could just get like hands up from you guys, how many people have been out to the colony at least once? How many people have been out there? So Nick has been out there.
I have.
Lindsay, yeah, Lindsay and Allison. It's an amazing place. If you haven't had a chance to get out there, we should get you out there because it's pretty amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. So weekly count. So what we do in the field, this is what we end up doing in the field. We count the number of animals and we can classify them based on their age and based on their sex at the colony. And so that's important when we're trying to understand how a colony grows. If it's a pup that was just born, if it's a weanling, if it's juvenile returning, if it's an adult male, it's pretty important to understand. So we've been working together with Anya Nuevo to make sure that we are standardized in the way that we do this. We mark them, as many of you have been out there, probably seen that they have Clairol dye marks on their sides. And this is a way for us to be able to count them in a way and to keep track of them in a way that doesn't disturb them. It disturbs them initially. Sometimes they just sleep through it, but we just put a little bit of Clairol dye on them. It will molt off in the spring when they come back to molt. But it does help us count and keep track of the numbers and animals that are there. So we mark with hair dye to track the individuals, and then we recite tags. And so the seals that are born on different colonies are tagged with different colors. And so this is a seal that's returned to the King Range that is pink, which is from Point Reyes. And here's a seal that has green tags. and those are from Año Nuevo. And our tags are blue tags. So we also put tags out on these weaned pups here so that we'll know what their survival rate is, and we'll know how they're coming back to contribute to the growth of this colony, right? So that's what we're doing in the field. When you see us out there with our HSU research shirts on, that's what we're trying to do to help BLM and KRNCA figure out what is happening with these seals along the coast. So this is the timing of the elephant seal haul out. And so the subadult males are here during the breeding season, and the adult males are here during the breeding season, and then they molt in the summer. The adult females come during the breeding season, and then they come back and they molt in the spring. And then the juveniles are just kind of hit or miss, but they definitely come back and spend a huge part of their time in the resting haul out season. And the older juveniles do come back during the molting season. And so what we're coming up on now is the molting season, where we're going to have the adult females come back and the juveniles come back. And then the weanlings, which are ones that were born this winter in late December, early January, are going to all be weaned and off the colony by the end of May. And so at any time of year, you can go out to the Lost Coast colony and see some kind of elephant seal, right? And that's based on their natural history demands for refuge and for safe harbor. The spatial use of the King Range Conservation Area. I just want to show you, this is a sort of zoomed out picture, but here is the Punta Gorda Lighthouse, and this is during last year's breeding season. But you can see that year that the animals were stretched way far, all the way up north down to here and all the way past Willow Creek down to the south. And so you can see that there's plenty of space here for this colony to expand. There's space along the coastline and there's space up on the terrace. And so it seems like we are at the very beginning to look at how this habitat is colonized by these seals. So let me just tell you about the King Range growth. And again, this is with my grad students and undergraduate students over the years. So what we're seeing here is just the juvenile haul out rate. Just how many seals would you expect to see on a colony at any time? And then how many seals would you expect to see during the breeding season? How many would you expect to see during the female molting season? And what we're seeing here is that there are 3 different peaks in abundance along the time. So during the juvenile season, you can have over 300 juveniles. And we don't have the information from this year yet. We're still working on that. But the breeding season has about 400, and during the molt, you can have up to 750 animals at any time on the colony. So you can see that over the years, this is the last year, this light blue line was last season, you could see that those numbers are climbing as well. So it is a great place for elephant seals to be, and they seem to be thriving here. The number of pups born, and I just did this graph about 2 hours ago. You could see here in 2017 breeding season, etc., that this last breeding season we had 235 pups, and so you could see that it has a pretty straight trajectory going up. So there is more recruitment from seals, and there are more pups being born every year. So in summary, the elephant seal colony is growing steadily in size and space use, so it's expanding in all sorts of ways. We expect that it will expand from the beach onto the marine terrace. And if any of you have been out there hiking on the trail, sometimes you just come upon this massive elephant seal in the middle of the trail, so that happens. And we expect a colony growth to switch from mainly other colonies coming in, from immigrating from other colonies, to internal growth. And in fact, this is the first year that we've had pups that were tagged here come back to give birth. And so we've had 5 to 7 blue tagged female seals that were born here 4 years ago coming back and having their first pups this year. It's super exciting. We predict that this is going to be a seed colony. We predict that this is going to be the sort of jumping stone for then seals to sort of move up the coast. And we're looking into trying to predict where those places might be based on the special characters that we found of the colony here. The next steps are to continue baseline monitoring of the colony and to monitor this habitat expansion and basically to sort of think about how that's going to affect sort of the human and wildlife interactions in a way to keep both of them as safe as possible. what we'd like to do is to reach out to you and any of your friends and colleagues and to sort of welcome you to let us know if you see elephant seals outside of that area, and if you see elephant seals outside of that time frame, right? And so it may be that you might be farther south at USAL or some other place, and you might see a small group of elephant seals starting to be there. We'd love to hear about that. If you see any of our seals that are marked from a distance, we'd love to see a picture of that. And so again, marine mammals in general are big, they're long-lived, and they live along a huge stretch of coast, right? So it's really hard for a few people to study this well. It does take a village to study a marine mammal, and we'd like to welcome you into our village, and we want to thank you again for welcoming us into yours. So potential threats to elephant seals include sea level rise, which is threatening the haulouts, right? And in many cases, if you are on those pieces of coastline that have small beaches that are adjacent to cliffs, well, there's nowhere for those elephant seals to go, yeah? And that's a lot of the case down in Point Reyes. But here, at least where they are right now, that doesn't seem to be the case. Increased terrestrial temperature, and so elephant seals can get way too hot, and they can die from overheating, and we see some of that happening in some of the colonies that are way down south. Increased ocean temperature can lower the food source because productivity will go down. Hotter water holds fewer nutrients and less oxygen, so it would be less productive. And then there's increased disturbance, which can threaten the haul-out use. And so again, I don't know how the elephant seals found the Lost Coast, but they hit the jackpot. Like, it's the most beautiful, pristine, remote wilderness area, and it's surrounded by a community that are just really conscientious stewards, both historical communities and tribal communities and current communities. And so they've hit the jackpot to be here. But with increased disturbance, that can threaten the haul-out use. So I told you two stories of the research that we're doing here, and I wanted to shift for the last few minutes here to think about marine mammal strandings and what can they tell us about the populations of marine mammals that we can't see from shore, that we don't understand what's happening in the ocean environment unless we can decipher the story that they have to tell when they come ashore. So let me talk about some of the marine mammal strandings. So first of all, it's a stranded marine mammal, a whale or a dolphin that's on the beach, dead or alive, or in a habitat that's unsuitable for survival, or a pinniped when it's dead or in distress on a beach while not exhibiting normal behaviors. So we are the responding authority for dead marine mammals efforts in Del Norte County and Humboldt County and in northern Mendocino County. And so our job at Humboldt State is to respond to them and learn as much as humanly possible about these animals so that we can potentially make a difference. So why do marine mammals strand? Heck, I can basically say we're not exactly sure, but there's a couple categories of reasons. So one category is that there's because of human interactions, ship strikes, entanglement, fishing gear, pollution, either sound pollution or plastic pollution or chemical pollution, sound exposure, as I just mentioned, ingestion of marine debris, unusual weather or oceanographic events. So just normal processes in the ocean. And these normal processes have been sped up with global climate change. So we can think about things like harmful algal blooms, domoic acid, you may have heard of those sorts of things. Hot water blobs, again, those heat waves in the ocean, those ocean heat waves, or El Nino, which are massive current shifts that cause crazy weather conditions terrestrially, but also cause a pretty big disturbance in the currents of the ocean. And then there's natural causes from disease, injury from natural causes, etc. And so these are the kind of things that we try to tease apart so that we can understand what things do we have any power to sort of address and what things do we just need to sort of understand and monitor. So this is all done again in the Marine Mammal Stranding Program. Here's Allison in the thick of things here with students, and this is us working with BLM out to recover a beaked whale out on the coast. And this is us doing necropsies to try to really understand what's happening. We also save a lot of these specimens for future education and understanding in the HSU Fur Museum. So let me tell you a little bit about that. Our dead stranding response has two different components. One is responding to reports from the public. And I know some of you, I recognize some of your names and have already told us about some of these amazing critters that you found on the beach that we've been able to learn a lot from. Our goal there is to document the distribution of species and to determine cause of death if possible. And then we have these systematic carcass surveys. We do monthly surveys. By we, I mean my students who are amazing. They do monthly surveys of beach segments in Del Norte, Humboldt, and we're expanding to northern Mendocino County. And that helps to determine the normal seasonal stranding patterns and distribution and cause of death. And so if you walk the same beach every month and you do that for 10 years, well, you get a sense for what is the normal pattern, right? And it's not just because of chance, because somebody came upon it. We're walking there every month and we know what's happening. So it's the combination of these two, responding to calls from the public, as well as helping to train and educate this entire mass of students who are going on the beaches to do this effort-based work is what we're calling it. So this is what we found. And again, this is kind of not a confusing, but a complex graph at first. But if you look over here, these are just the marine mammal carcass observations for the last 10 years. And this is part of Allison's master's thesis. And so what we've done is look at each of these years or each different colors, and we've plotted them. And if you just glaze your eyes over, you can see there's a couple patterns. There's a lot that are stranding in April, May, and June, and some in August, but there's typically not that many that are stranding in October, November, December, January. But what we saw this last year, which is this red line, is that there's a big dip in August. So in August, in that part of the year, there weren't as many strandings. But look what's happening in October and November, more than we've ever seen in 10 years of work. Right. And if you look even here in 2022, we're seeing more than we've ever seen historically too. And so it's not that necessarily that we're expanding we're getting more calls or we're doing that. I think that this is likely a real event. And what Allison is trying to tease apart is that a response to getting more calls, or is a response to our effort-based surveys, just finding more animals, excuse me, or what are the oceanographic features that might be causing that? And so it's a complex and exciting thesis. So let me just give you some ideas about who strands the most. So for cetaceans, which are the whales and dolphins, the most common strander along the north coast are the harbor porpoise, and the second is the gray whale. So we can expect to see 3 or 4 gray whale stranding every year. And then the pinnipeds, or the seals and sea lions, our most common strander is the California sea lion, and our second most common strander is the harbor seal. So how do you determine cause of death? Well, it's a challenge, right? And so I want to walk you through that process because some of you have been a part of that or witnessed some of that, and some of you are curious about how that whole process goes. So I wanted to just share some of this with you. So when a marine mammal strands, the first thing we do is an external assessment. Sometimes we have the opportunity to either do a field necropsy here, and this is me with my daughter when she was 2 doing a necropsy on a fin whale, and then and sometimes we bring them back to the lab to do even a more detailed necropsy. So let me just walk you through those steps. So to understand and to piece together this puzzle of why an animal stranded, you do a careful assessment and measurement of the carcass. And so it's like CSI for marine mammals. You try to look to see if there are any clues about what might be going on. You identify the sex, the species, the population. And then you do some basic health determination by taking some samples, like looking at how deep the blubber is, which tells you how fit it is, or how many resources it has. You look at the composition of that. You can look at the teeth to see how old it is. You can look at baleen for health assessment. You can look at the organs to see how healthy the different organs are. You can also take feces, urine, blood to sort of be able to figure out what's happening there. And then collect tissue around any unusual observations and then send them off for analysis. And we say we send them off for analysis and histology, which means that people look at the cells in these different organs to see if they're unusual or not, much like you would have any sort of human or vet lab do. So after you have your samples, then what? And so you have all of these different components of this that I just talked to you about. And then sometimes the picture becomes clear below that, right? So sometimes then you get an idea of like, that's what happened. And I have to say, and Allison can agree that that doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, we don't have a sort of really pinpointed cause of death. But I wanted to take you through a couple of these strandings that happen in your neck of the woods and give you some more information that we've gained. So one, Southern Humboldt coastline is amazing and it's vast. And as you know, there's not many people walking their dogs on it every day, right? But I think it is the hot spot of the entire coast. And partially I think of that because as you look here again, we have these 3 deep sea canyons that are coming into this area. And we have had a really high proportion of our cetaceans that are pelagic or deep sea animals that have stranded along these coastlines. And those include Cuvier's beaked whale, sperm whales, striped dolphin. And so this is a really amazing opportunity for us to learn more about who's living way off the coast here by being able to look at these beaches and see who's here. So a couple of ones, we had a killer whale neonate, which means a baby killer whale. And the baby killer whale was found during an effort-based walk in Petrolia. This was supposed to sort of, let me just see if I can, nope, let me see. No, it's not going to do it. Oh, shoot. Well, I had a series of pictures here, and maybe I can show them to you afterwards. But it could be one of 3 types of killer whales. It could be a transient, which goes all the way from Alaska all the way down to sort of Southern California, feeding on big whales, on other marine mammals. Could be a resident one, which typically stays and eats salmon up around the Vancouver Island, but we've had some of them come down here. Or it could be an offshore type of killer whale that feeds on sharks and rays. So Allison and others collected samples here to help determine cause of death, and we're still in the waiting phase for those. But they did take careful samples. Oh, I'm so sad that this isn't showing up for you, but maybe I can make it show up later. There was another one that was a bottlenose dolphin that was found in Shelter Cove on 4 August 2020. And it was an amazing opportunity to see this kind of dolphin that never comes here. We have 2 samples of it in the last 40 years of bottlenose dolphin ever coming up here. And so thankfully, people in Shelter Cove, an amazing group of community folks, helped us load this onto our truck and bring it back to HSU. And there we were able to conduct these measurements that are super important. These measurements that help us determine sex, these photographs of the dorsal fin that help us identify the exact individual, as well as being able to open this animal and do a careful internal necropsy. And again, I'm saying we, but it was mostly Allison and our students. So again, they're rare in Northern California. It was a large adult male. And then at the end, what we do, send those samples off, and we got the report back. And this report said that the death was attributed to sepsis, likely originating gastric ulcers. So this animal had gastric ulcers or ulcers in its stomach, and they were mostly because of invasive nematodes. And so these parasites created ulcers in the stomach, and those ulcers led to a sort of systematic infection. And so it led to the animal not having a high nutritive status, and so it wasn't in good shape, and it died. But again, these are typically southern animals, typically pelagic animals, and the thought that it just showed up on the beach in Shelter Cove is amazing. And we were lucky enough to have people that called us and worked with us to help us understand more about what was happening with that animal. So we got a more complete picture of that animal. We got all of the different measurements and samples, and we were able to understand the story of what the cause of death for this animal was. And most recently, I know some of you were involved in this, and some of you were able to see what was happening here, but a juvenile female humpback whale stranded in Shelter Cove on the 30th. So we want to, again, reach out and thank everyone who let us know about this and who supported our lovely crew out there while they were working on it. And again, what you can see here is a series of pictures, and I can't tell you how important pictures are, because luckily this whale stayed so that we could see it the next day, but sometimes they're there for one day and they go away. And even a picture can help us understand what is happening with that animal. And you see here this little photo card, you can see it in all of these pictures, and it has a measuring standard here, and it has the information about the whale here as well. So what we noticed right away with this whale is that it's really thin, right? And so if you look at enough humpback whales, which sadly we have on the shoreline, you could see that it's really sunken in here around the dorsal fin, right? And you could see that it's really sunken in here behind the head. So this is a really thin, emaciated whale. What Allison was really able to do was to look at things like the blubber depth and look at the blubber consistency and to measure it around the body, as well as look at internal organs with some of our students, and got a sense that there was really some sort of systemic thing happening with this humpback whale. It was an emaciated whale, had a really high parasite load that was something Allison and I had never seen before. A relatively thin blubber layer, but the weird thing was that Allison saw that it had a full digestive tract, so it had been eating. It just hadn't been able to incorporate that food into sort of increase its condition, and had unusual texture and condition of the organs. And so Allison took a series of samples that are ready to be sent off for analysis. So this animal we don't still know very much about. So this picture is still, the full picture of this animal is still building. And maybe if we get a chance to chat again, I can come back and talk to you about it. So just quickly, a summary for our stranding research is that strandings are likely going to reflect the changing environmental conditions. It's going to reflect increasing ocean temperatures, unpredictable prey bases, toxic algal blooms. They could also reflect the changing level of human interactions, increased pollution, increased ship strikes, etc. But they also can reflect survey effort. And so again, we have a huge stretch line of coast that HSU responds to in Northern Mendocino, Humboldt, and Del Norte. And we don't have as many people along our beaches as they have in other places. So maybe we aren't seeing as many strandings up here just because we don't have the ability to look. And some places we can't even get to. Some of those pocket beaches are impossible. But they can be an indicator of ocean health. And so these strandings can be an early warning sign to us about something that might be happening offshore. Okay. So in summaries, our oceans are being impacted by human-caused global climate change. It impacts everything from currents, ocean temperature, pH, productivity. And it's going to change, it's going to impact these things that marine mammals depend on our shoreline for, which includes migrating through, it includes being a safe harbor for them, and which includes prey resources. So what I wanted to leave you with today is how can we monitor or predict those impacts? And we can do that through observation, from shore observations of marine mammals to photographs of stranded animals to targeted and collaborative research. And again, marine mammals are tough to study on your own. You need to have a community of interested stewards and committed stewards to do this well. And so the idea is to sort of really work to partner with local stewards and communities. And so, like I said, it takes a village to understand marine mammals, particularly in our remote and beautiful part of the world. And so if you'd like to be a part of this, there are a number of ways you can. Basically, to report any stranded marine mammal to marinemammals@humboldt.edu, or you can call our hotline at 826-3650, and maybe Allison can put that in the chat. If you send us a photo and a location, that's perfect. So just a photograph and a location. And then if you don't mind us following up with you to get a little more information, that'd be great. That's how we've learned so much about so much of the critters that have stranded here. We'd love to hear about any gray whale sightings in the winter and summer months. And again, just email us at marinemammals@humboldt.edu. Who knows if it's really Shelter Cove that is the end of their feeding range. Maybe there's a bunch of them that stay there. I don't know, but you might know or know somebody who does, and we'd love to hear from you. And then if you have other ideas, we're open for it. Heck, if you would like to build a community marine mammal steward group, let us know. Different communities have whale sighting efforts, and they have seal spotters and all these sorts of things. So if anyone is interested in that, like I am more than a willing partner, I'd love to talk with you. And so with that, I think I'm going to end and thank you all for your kind attention. I remind you that this work was done under NOAA permits. I'd like to thank the Friends of the Lost Coast, Justin, and the whole group of amazing folks that have offered me the opportunity to talk to you. BLM folks, my grad students who I adore, my undergraduate interns who are here, and our funding agencies. And I'd like to give a special thanks to some community members there who have helped to support HSU Mammals Training Program during responses, including the Suzanne and Peter and Dale. And so I just wanted to thank you for all of your kind attention today. I know you have busy days, but I just wanted to thank you for coming, and I'm here if you have any questions.
Thanks, Dawn. That was great. It looks like we got a couple of questions that are coming into the chat, and I'd like to encourage folks to either use the chat or to use the raise hand feature. People can turn on their video and their audio to ask their question if they prefer, but we'll just start with some of these questions in the chat. Can you speak to how plastics cause any specific issues?
Yeah, so plastics in all sorts of ways, in terms of old fishing line or in terms of other plastics that get into the ocean, can cause and have caused, and we've documented deaths from that. And so everything from a sperm whale stomach that was full of fishing gear to pieces of plastic that obstruct the gastrointestinal tract, to microplastics that have issues, but we're not even sure what those are yet. So plastics do form a real issue. I'd say probably the biggest impact of plastics right now is on entanglement, and particularly in things like entanglement for sea lions, where they get plastics wrapped around their necks or their flippers, and they just don't go away. And so the animal suffers and then dies from those entanglements. So I think, does that answer your question?
They can chime back in if they,
Okay.
let's see. So another one is, do you use iNaturalist to see observations?
Yeah, Carrie, that's a great question. We do. And we monitor iNaturalist too. So you might see Allison or I pop up and say, yes, that's an elephant seal, or no, it's this. So that is one way for sure to sort of share your observations. So if you see a dead marine mammal on the beach, iNaturalist, if you don't know about it, it's an app through California Academy of Sciences that is really used to sort of document biodiversity around the country. And there are some aspects of it around the world. And so you can take a picture of it and you can upload it, and then we can get a sense of it that way. The hard thing about iNaturalist sometimes is that if it was a really significant finding, like one of those, a baby killer whale or something like that, and we didn't see it in time, or by the time it gets to iNaturalist, it may have been washed off by the next day. So I encourage you to do that. But if you do find a dead marine mammal on the beach, we encourage you just to email us really quickly on your phone, mammals@humboldt.edu, or give us a call, and then we can come out and help to understand a little bit more about the cause of death and the location. And so either way, but I think that's a great idea, Carrie. iNaturalist is one of my favorite things to do.
Great. Another question is, you mentioned not many dogs on the Soham beaches. Is the concern their behaviors toward mammals or feces in the ocean?
Oh, thanks, Donna. I was actually mentioning that, you can't really walk in Southern California and throw a rock without hitting somebody walking with their dog. So there's just so many people on the beaches down there. So I was mostly saying that there's not many people that you see on the beach at any given time here, which is part of why we love it. But the other part that you bring up is super important. And so dogs and marine mammals don't often mix. And when I'm out on the colony for elephant seals, some people are coming out and their dogs aren't under voice control, and they come out and they bark at the seals and seals bark at them. And there are a couple things that can go wrong there. One, just physical biting of one or the other. And then two, the transmission of leptospirosis, which is a sort of paralytic disease, and as well as other diseases, can be transferred through feces and through exchange of saliva. So I think that those are my two main things that I am concerned about. But if you have your dog on a leash, or they're under voice control and can come back, that's great.
Thank you. So yeah, folks, anybody who wants to chime in, you're welcome to turn your video cameras on, or use the raise hand feature to ask your question. And in the meantime, I had a question, which is, So with the Pacific Feeding Group, how was it that we learned about this, and what similarities exist between the coastal conditions off of Trinidad and in Humboldt and Baja California?
Hmm. Thanks, that's great. So the PCFG group has gone through a number of different iterations over time. We at first noticed that there were just a few whales that we saw during the summer, when theoretically, if they read the book, they should be migrating all the way to Alaska and back. And so that was maybe 25 years ago. We got the inkling that that was happening. It started, that understanding started up in British Columbia with a scientist named Jim Darling, who monitored whales around Vancouver Island that were there during the summertime months. So that was the first inkling of that. But the more that we started to look, the more we started to see. And so the difference between here and Baja is that Baja really doesn't have very high productivity. It's really warm water. It's not very productive. And the baleen whales, the gray whales, don't feed during the time that they're down there. So they come up here or up in the Arctic during the summer months and just gorge on food. They eat tons of food and they get quite fat. And then the fat sustains them as they go down. So the females go down and they give birth and they nurse, and then they migrate back up, which is what we'll be seeing around now. And then the males go down there and mate. And so Baja is kind of the safe zone. It was thought to be like the safe, like home base, because the killer whales and other large predators don't go down there. And so it's thought that that's where they could give birth and really be safer during that really vulnerable time.
And do you have a sense of the Pacific Feeding Group population relative to the larger population of gray whales?
Yeah, it's quite small. It's in the 300 to 400 animals versus 25,000. So it's a small subset of that. And so we're trying to understand more about the sort of everything from the genetics to the movement patterns of those animals.
Great. Looks like we got some more questions in the chat. One that relates to this is, what are they feeding on when they pass by here, and how important is the arthropod concentration in Trinidad Harbor to the resident populations?
Wow, thanks, Greta. That's awesome. They are feeding on a number of different things. So we see gray whales oftentimes feeding in kelp, and they're feeding on mysids, so little tiny krill-ish animals. And they also feed on benthic invertebrates or epibenthic ones that are above there. So you might see, if you're walking along the coast, you might see big mud plumes. And those mud plumes are really just the food that's coming out of their mouth. So gray whales go down to the bottom, take a big mouthful of mud, and then they squish it around in their mouth and then push out the water and the mud and save the invertebrates in between. And so what you see then is, when you're looking from the cliffs, you see these big mud plumes around. It's like, what is going on? But that's just gray whales feeding. So they do two things. They feed both on the krill and kelp and those kinds of structures, and then they feed on the benthic invertebrates.
Thank you. Another question in the chat was, could you repeat when elephant seals moved from threatened to their return?
Oh, I would say in the 60s, they kind of crossed that barrier. But really, they had gone down to, I think 12 is the number that I know that was found in the sort of cave in a sort of remote island in Mexico. And that's how this whole new population has sprung from those few animals a long time ago. And so then they moved to sort of different locations along the way. And Año and the Channel Islands were some of the earlier sort of colonization areas, and then they've spilled over to Point Reyes and the Farallones and Pedras Blancas, and now recently, in the last 5 or 10 years, they've come up to here to King Grange. So we are the most northern sort of functional colony, and it's starting to really thrive and to take off.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
All right, any more questions out there? Folks, please use the raise hand feature, or don't be shy, turn on your video camera and your audio, and we'd love to hear your voice and see your face if you've got questions to ask. Another question I had in the meantime is, are you looking for people to monitor specific stretches of beach along the local coast?
Yeah, we would love that. And so, I just want to say hi to Allison here and let her jump in if she has any other things. But yeah, part of what we would love to do is have, for the stranding work, the very basic, most wonderful thing would be if someone was taking a walk with their dogs or whatever, and they just came upon a marine mammal, to just email us marine mammals with a picture and a location, and then and tell their friends, so spread the word. But if anyone is interested in becoming part of our program and doing a monthly walk, it's just like one walk a month. In particular, that Shelter Cove beach where the boat launch ramp is, we've gotten like 5 dolphins there in the last few years that Peter and others have called us about. So something really fascinating is happening along that area. And again, if we had someone or a pair of people or 3 people who wanted to take that on and just walk that beach every month, once a month, and let us know what they find, or if they don't find something, then that would just make us really happy. We're also looking for folks who could help us down at USOL and areas down south. If you have any local knowledge of other beaches that you just like to walk and you would be willing to just walk it once a month and let us know what you find, please contact us at marinemammals@humboldt.edu. We'd love that.
Great. And folks can get a hold of us at info@lostcoast.org if they want more information. We can share your contacts as well.
Thank you.
So looks like
Lindsay and Andrew have unmuted. Do you have a question?
Oh, you're very sensitive. Thank you. I'm not too good at this Zoom. Many years ago, I was inspired by an academic at UC Santa Cruz, Bernie somebody, who studied, yes, who studied marine mammals, in particular, the elephant seals of that Año Nuevo colony. He discovered that they were virtually clones of one another due to having arisen from such a tiny population. So are we getting over that monoclonal problem with them? Or do we know anything about their genetics?
We do know that their genetics, I think there are some more advanced techniques that now can sort of tell tiny differences in genetics between animals, but it is what we call a homogeneous population, like their genes are pretty much the same. Yeah. And the danger to that is that if you have some pathogen that comes through that one of the elephant seals is susceptible to, the entire population is likely susceptible to too. So that's one of the challenges to having such a sort of, like you said, kind of cloned group of animals. Yeah. But yeah, Bernie was figured that out early on for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It looks like Marcia Ehrlich might be unmuted as well. Did you have a question, Marcia?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes. Hi, Marcia.
About 6 or 8 years ago, a Yurok gentleman by the name of Sam came through and left a note on the post office. If we saw a marine mammal that was dead, please phone him. I'm wondering, I know he did it for a year. I'm wondering, one, has it occurred to you to put notices up on bulletin boards for people to report to you? And the other is, have you worked with the Yurok study?
Yeah, thanks, Marcia, for asking that. Yeah, we do have some up and on sort of local beaches, and BLM and other agencies have been great about helping us publicize that. At the Mattole campground, we have a sign. So we can do better with that, and we will. But yes, we worked with the Yurok, and a particularly interesting study when they were thinking about reintroducing the condor. And when that was in the works, what they wanted to see was if the condors are feeding on marine mammals, is that going to be bad for them? Are there potential contaminants in marine mammal blubber that really could have a negative impact on this reintroduction process? So I worked with Chris West and other biologists to sort of really try to tease this apart. And it turns out that there are contaminants in pretty much every animal, including us, but that they aren't at levels that would be dangerous, such as the sort of things that they're finding in lead and other things in terrestrial animals. And so part of understanding what is stranding along the coast is to understand what kind of resources are available for condors if they become really ingrained here and the population rises. Is that going to be beneficial or detrimental? So yeah, I think, does that answer your question?
It does. It does. Thank you.
Yeah. Allison, do you have anything to add from?
No, you covered everything so well. It's just great to see this awesome turnout, and it's wonderful to be a part of that community down there. So thank you guys all for the role that you played in the work that we're doing. And yeah, if you do find any dead marine mammals, let us know. There's also the North Coast Marine Mammal Center if you see marine mammals that are alive but in distress, and we can share that information also. And like Dawn said, photos are really helpful. Location, a lat long. I like to take a screenshot of my position with my phone, and it's just like a really quick, easy way. You don't have to write numbers down, and then it's like a photo as well. So I like to add that in when I let people know how to report things. And then photos of the head is really helpful, of course, on dead animals only. You want to get close to alive. And especially the Lost Coast, we should mention that elephant seals do sometimes look dead, but are not dead. And so, of course, if something is really fresh looking, use caution when you're approaching it, and don't go into the colony, of course, as I'm sure you guys are all aware, since you're wonderful stewards of the land down there. But yeah, I think that's my little plug. Thank you so much. Great to see you all here.
On behalf of Friends of the Lost Coast and the Bureau of Land Management King Range National Conservation Area, thank you for tuning in to Lost Coast Lectures. To view the complete archive of recordings from this series, or to learn more about our work inspiring a passion for nature, visit Friends of the Lost Coast online at lostcoast.org.